Here's another game of my student, Lee Gardner. Lee had the black pieces in this one. And when we analyzed the game afterwards, he told me that in this position, he didn't know what to do. That's how he described it. He said, I didn't know what to do now. And so what he played is bishop d4, which is a pretty fundamental mistake, because in this type of game, when you're defending, as he sort of is, because white wants to play moves like f5 and open up an attack on the king side, you don't want to trade off your defensive piece. And the bishop on f6 is one of his key defensive pieces. Like on g7, it covers up the king. So what's interesting is his language is very telling. When he said, I didn't know what to do, what he was saying was that he was looking for something to do. And although that might seem very natural to look for something to do, truth be told, he doesn't need to do anything. He just needs to make his position better, improve his position. And if you're trying to do something, it means you feel a little desperate. It means white is beginning to attack. And it's true, white is just beginning to attack. Moves like f5, bishop takes g6, h4, h5. These are things which black will think about, but none of them are happening quite yet. But if you think they are, or if the potential for them happening makes you think, I have to do something, it can make you overcommit, make you anxious. It can make you flail out before you have to, and make the problem worse and worse. And that's what happened here. So if Lee had simply asked himself, okay, what pieces of mine need to be activated? And that's, of course, a very natural question for a chess player to ask. Then he would say, oh, my queen is on a5. All I have to do is bring her into the game, then I'll be great. Queen c3. A very simple move, which is tremendously strong. And now already black's game is very, very good. All it took was one move. Here he was being pressured, because obviously his queen and knight are outside of the game. You play queen c3, and I should point out, of course, that this is based on a tactic. He seems to be giving up a pawn, but after bishop takes c5, black has the tactic bishop d4 check. If the king moves, of course, you just win the piece. And after bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, you have a fork. King and bishop on e4, and black wins a piece. So after queen c3, the pawn on c5 is indirectly defended. And after queen c3, if black plays rook f3, the back rank is very weak, and queen e1 check wins the game because rook f1 is forced. Queen takes e3 check wins the piece. Actually wins two pieces because e4 hangs next. And if the white bishop moves, say bishop back to f2, then everything else is falling apart. The pawn on b3 hangs. Next, the black knight can get into the game, play knight takes c4. Suddenly black's game explodes onto the scene. So we had this position, and Lee was trying to figure out, what can I do, what can I do? And so he traded something, because he saw on one level that the white bishop pinned down the black queen to a5, and he didn't just look for a tactical way to make that not important, like queen c3. So queen c3 would be a very simple way to come back in. But sometimes, and I've experienced this in my own games, we feel as if things are much, much worse than they actually are. And what happens is that our state of mind makes the position into what we feared it was when it really wasn't. And that's what happened here. Lee played bishop d4. His opponent made the trade, bishop takes d4, c takes d4, and that's fine. Lee's game is also okay now. And the guy played f5. Now, black to move. What would you do? Here we have a similar sort of moment. Lee was convinced that his position was bad. He made a final judgment. And by judging the position as bad, by giving it like a money signal, losing, he made himself desperate, and so what he wanted to do was lash out. So he played the move d5, which is kind of a reactive decision. It's saying, okay, you're attacking on the side, so I'm going to counterattack in the center quickly, boom, without even really calculating it. Now, it's true that this position is one in which black has to be a little careful because white's next move will be f takes g6. But again, if we ask ourselves, how do we improve our position with black, bring the queen into the game, queen c3 is a very simple, logical, easy way to make our position better. Because still, this tactically responds to white's main threat. If f takes g6 now, then queen e3 check, and black wins immediately. King h1, rook takes f1 is mate, and rook f2, just take it, and then mate. So, with a clear head, you'll see that queen c3 responds to all of white's attack, improves the position, attacks the b3 point, undermines the c4 point that way, prepares queen e3 check. Black's game is perfectly fine. Or, you can see the attack, get nervous, judge your position as being very bad, and play a move like d5. If I were to give this position to Lee as a tactic, he would tell me queen c3, I'm positive, within 30 seconds. But in the game, in the emotional sway of competition, he got thrown off by the attack. d5. And now his opponent should have simply played bishop d3. Holding on to the rook a little more, getting out of the way, keeping the bind against the rook, preparing f takes g6, that was the right way to go. But his opponent played a very bad move, b4. But we're not so concerned with white's play. We're focusing on the psychological state of black. Now, if he had been keyed into the nuances of the position, he would have been very happy here, but I think what he thought is that White's attack was coming very fast now. The guy saw something. After b4, Lee took back, queen takes b4. And then after c takes d5, black to move. Take your time. Look at this like a chess problem. What would you do? And here once again we feel the effect of the downward spiral. Lee was so taken by the attack, so taken by the drama of what the opponent did. He was convinced a long time ago that his position was worse, and it was getting worse and worse and worse with every decision, but still his opponent made such a strange decision that his position was still very, very good. Black to move. What would you do? What I would recommend to you, when you're attacked in the side, is to think about how to counterattack in the center, which Lee did with d5. When he played it, that wasn't necessarily the correct decision, but it was also very interesting, and it was an idea which was quite classically rooted. His attack was f5, so he responded with d5. Then White played this idea of b4, because he wanted to distract Lee from the d5 point. That was the guy's idea. And now White's next move will be f takes g6. The question is how to stop that. What would you do? Here Lee was completely unable to regain his balance, and he played the move queen c4, which responds very concretely to f takes g6, because now the queen and the rook are piled up against the rook, so f takes g6 is pinned, rook takes f1 is mate. But that's all that it does. It also takes the queen off of the defense of the rook on f8, and it doesn't activate any other pieces. What Lee should have done was the very strong central thrust d3. This also responds to the idea of f takes g6, because now if f takes, queen d4 check forces the king out of the defense of f1 and black wins. This move also stops White's other idea of f6, because now after queen d4 check, the king has to move, and rook takes f6 wins the pawn. Notice, of course, that d3 is defended because bishop takes d3 is pinned to the white queen on g4. After d3, suddenly black is much, much better. So you'll notice that the downward spiral in this game was in Lee's head. The position actually wasn't getting worse and worse and worse, but what was happening is that his psychological state was getting worse, and his belief in the position getting worse and worse made him feel as if things were getting further and further away from him, while, truth be told, this position here, as we look at it, is much better than the original position we had looked at for black. Now, of course, that's because White's moves weren't the best, but in this exact chess position, if I were to give this to you as a tactic and say black to move, I know that my student would find d3 immediately. So if you're playing a chess game and you feel emotional and you make a little bit of a mistake and you feel the game slipping away, what you have to do then is come back to the immediate moment. Come back to the position. Don't think about the fact that you were winning a minute ago and now you're only slightly better, or man, I had him and now I'm lost, or maybe you had a great position and then it's only drawn, or maybe we're slightly worse and now you're much worse. You're not losing until the game ends. You can always find a way out as long as you come back to the moment and find the truth of the position. And here's a perfect example. Lee felt like he was on the verge of losing. He felt a little desperate, but in fact he's on the verge of winning. The simple move d3. Take a look at the position for a while and work out for yourself why it's so good. After queen c4, on the other hand, White played f6. And now things really start to get difficult. White's next move is going to be bishop takes g6. And now it truly is the case that black is somewhat locked out of the game, because if he plays d3 now, then after queen e6 check, if king h8, then queen e7 will be brutal. And if rook f7, then queen e8 check, rook f8, f7 check, king g7, queen e5 check. And I'm sure you can see that black is in big trouble. After f6, Lee tried to defend with king h8. Here his opponent played queen g5, and once defending d5 and preparing queen h6. Lee played rook f7, and now White played the decisive thrust. Bishop takes g6, h takes g6, queen takes g6. And now it's really true. Black is losing. Queen takes d5, rook f4. The next move is going to be rook h4 check. If Lee tries rook h7, then f7 wins the game. Lee played queen d7, and the game finished after rook h4, rook h7, rook takes h7, queen takes h7, queen e8 check. And here he resigned because after queen g8, f7 wins the game. So you can see how this example is very much tied into the theme of materialism. When you make a judgment about the game, like here I'm in big trouble, then you allow yourself to get on this emotional roller coaster where you're going up and down instead of staying in that tranquil middle ground. And then what happened in this game to Lee is that he got on that downward spiral, like the woman in the bicycle that I described in my introduction. His position got worse and worse and worse, not because of the chessboard, but because of his state of mind.